Wessex Community Assets is about communities getting access to finance and assets. It's about small places like this finding that everything around them is shutting down and the village is becoming unviable. Money's not available to do anything about it externally. Interest isn't there possibly externally. So it's about Wessex Community Assets is about people getting what they want for themselves and not relying on the outside so much. So I started with community shares in particular, and at the beginning it was a lot about local shops, some pub contacts and village halls. But the last 1.5 years there's been an awful lot of interest in renewables because of the feed-in tariff, offering a source of income. It, as well as saving fuel bills, it can also mean that you can use the income to pay for other things to happen, which may or may not be other low-carbon initiatives. It might just be, I don't know, helping pay for the rent somewhere or some other community improvement. So it's about the idea of the community owning something, but they then decide what they do with the income from that. And because they've got true ownership of it and control of it, it's entirely up to them what they do. So I've got some slides. I'll run through them, but I would like, some of the things I'm going to say might not be clear, or people might disagree with, and I would like it if people immediately said that's not clear, or I disagree with that, because otherwise you're going to go away at the end and think, I'm really not sure what to take from this. What I want to help you understand today is how fairly straightforward it is, to raise money using withdrawal share issues offered to the community. And that can be quite a large area as well, communities, so you can get these are sums of money. This summer I was helping a Vesco in South East, and they wanted to put photovoltaic on a brewery, a friendly brewery, who wanted to do a PR exercise. And I said, how much money are you looking to raise? And they said, I think it's 305,000. Right, well, okay, I'll help you where I can. That seems an awful lot of money. And they did it. I think they raised that money in about 6 weeks. They had a lot of head start. They are sort of well in with the transition movement, and they've done a lot of work previously. But even so, it gives you an idea of the kind of money you can get if what you're offering people is an opportunity to not donate, but invest in something which gives them a social return and a financial return. They haven't waved goodbye to the money. And it seems to be government-backed, the feed-in tariff. So which one do I press? So, been discussion about money this morning, happy to be paid for so far. A lot of talk about grants. If you can get grants, that's brilliant. One of the things I'm not really here talking about low carbon stuff, it's just because of the interest in it, I deal in renewables a bit. But if I'm here to talk about ownership and control, really. So if you're looking for a grant, the thing to bear in mind is anything I'm telling you now about how you should set yourselves up. If you're looking at a grant, you need to check with your grant funder that they're happy with what you're doing. That's quite important, otherwise you'd be annoyed. So then, if you haven't got a grant, you have to consider where your financing is going to come from. And one of the things that I'm going to offer to you is the idea of trading to generate money. So, if you're going to do something which is going to trade, you need to think, well, I want to be personally protected from liability around this. I need to set up a legal structure that means that I can sign contracts and employ people and all this kind of stuff without being personally liable. So you need to work out what sort of thing you're going to set up. And my partner, Debbie, she does a lot of this stuff as well, and her thing is form follows function. So you have to think, what are you aiming to do? And that would inform who would be interested, I guess. Who is going to benefit, and that will also inform who's going to help you. Who will own it? And that's about the control, but it could be separate. So for instance, in a charity situation, you have a thing in a charity where no one really owns the assets of the charity. The charity holds the assets. And if things go very badly wrong, the assets move to another charity, but no one's really owning it. But it's controlled by the trustees, who are then liable for any losses of the, whatever it is they own. And you've got to think, who's going to pay for it? So that ties in with all the other stuff, really. You know, are the beneficiaries going to pay for it? Are the people controlling it going to pay for it? I've written there, mentioned vested interest. A large part of what I do is I set up industrial profit societies for the benefit of the community, which are also known as community benefit societies. There's a bit of legal stuff, but they will call that soon. So I'm talking to you from the standpoint of risk sales.
They will pull it soon? What does that mean?
Hey?
They will pull that soon, you said. What do you mean by that?
At the moment there's an act that's gone through Parliament. They're going to change the name of industrial property societies for the benefit of the community to community benefit societies. It's all been signed off, all the paperwork's been done, the Queen's okayed it. For reasons I don't understand, I think basically just because it's not very important, they haven't actually gone through yet. So you will find, when you're reading around this stuff, you will find two terms used. They are the same thing, but if you're talking, as soon as you start dealing with solicitors and the FSA, the Financial Services Authority, you're going to have to revert to the old big name, even though everyone just now calls it community benefit societies. Not very interesting, but true. Sorry?
When you say choosing your legal form, does that mean your legal structure?
Yes, the form you're going to take. So, I've mentioned vested interest. So one of the things that people quite like is stuff they understand, and that's reasonable. And they also like things that are cheap. Now, a company limited by guarantee is the sort of thing that you would set up if you wanted to then get charitable status, become a registered charity. They're very cheap, cost £15 to set up a company with fairly standard memorandum and articles from the Companies House. You'd have to check your objects matched with the Charity Commission's okay. But you know, they are cheap to set up, and everyone understands about companies. Everyone's dealt with companies through their life, or work for one, set one up. You know, it's a fairly standard thing. You can choose to have democracy in a company limited by guarantee. In your governing document, you can say that every member has one equal vote. But there are issues around, you could have a class of membership which doesn't vote. You don't have an asset lock, and I'm going to ignore that for now and just say that an asset lock is a bit like the charity thing earlier on about ownership. Once you set up your company limited by guarantee, you could either do it as a KIC or you can convert to a KIC later. A KIC is a community interest company. I'm going to kind of disregard those as well at the moment because they can't issue shares. And I want to talk to you about raising share capital, not debt. And if you were a KIC or a charity, you could actually take on debt. You could get people to lend you money. And I'll explain why that you might not want to do that. However, a KIC could trade and receive grants. I work with one that does at the moment. And a charity could certainly receive grants. And of course with a charity you get this fantastic tax stuff going on. But there's an issue about whether it's a charitable purpose to put PV on the roof. So you have to work around that a little bit. And yes, I've written down the issue. Yes.
You mentioned on the previous slide, you said trustees are liable.
Yes, in a charity, even though the assets are held by the charity and controlled by the trustees have to be really careful how that money is used. And I get the rather boring email alerts about charities where things have gone slightly wrong. And if things have gone slightly wrong, and it's the trustees who made a decision and they haven't quite followed what the Charity Commission would like them to do, they are personally responsible. But there is all of this actually, you're going to come across this thing where sooner or later you are personally responsible. So that is worth bearing in mind. But none of this
problem, responsibility.
Unfortunately, there is liability involved. I mean, it's fine as long as you behave. It's not an issue. It's just if you I mean, one of the things that I know from knowing the sector, one of the things I do know that happens is some trustees don't quite read the boring paperwork every quarter, and then things start sliding. So if you're involved in anything, my advice is read all the paperwork.
Chris, is it a good idea if you do get that situation, is it available to take out an insurance like you could for directors and liability insurance?
No, because you've been negligent in your duties. An insurance company, actually insurance is almost worthless from that respect. As if you do everything right, then you just sue the person who did the thing that's wrong. If you've done something wrong, your insurance won't cover you. So like I said, there is this responsibility thing, but it's no different from driving a car. You know, you behave, you follow the speed limit. If you have a crash, it's not a problem. So yes, and now we'll talk about asset locks because they are important to why Wessex particularly is keen on community benefit societies. An asset lock is the idea that if you set up something for the community, I was going to do this somewhere. If you set up something for the community, it should belong to the community. So if you have a situation where you set up something, people put money in and they now legally own it, you have to be careful. They can't then later on say, you don't legally own this, it's worth a fortune, you're going to sell it. Because then all the effort that everyone's put in and all the agreements about the community, if you put in a whopping great wind turbine somewhere and the community agreed to it because they can see it for everyone's benefit, and then later on it turned out to be for private profit, that would be great. So if you've got an asset lock, the idea is that everything owned, the assets and any income generated, is held by the organisation, and the members can control it and use it, and they do it according to the governing documents that they agreed to at the beginning as members when they signed up. If it's misused, that's, again, the liability thing. But the important thing is, at the end of the year, if things are going well, you have a lump of money and an asset that you can then use to spread wealth in the community. And like I say, you can choose to do further low carbon initiatives, but it might be anything. So that's why an asset lock is worth thinking about. If you don't get one of those with a co-op, you wouldn't get one of those with just a standard company limited by guarantee. You would get it with a kick, and you would get it with a charity. But kicks and charities you're back up against, well, how do they get the money in? If you've got a grant coming in, that's great. And some charities that give money to other charities will only give it to other charities. They wouldn't give it to a kick, for instance. There are concerns around how kicks operate. They're meant to be quite adventurous in what they do. They're meant to trade. So charities, for instance, might think they're a bit too high risk for money. And that's why I've written a co-op. Now there's quite a lot of interest in setting up co-ops, because everyone understands what a co-op is. But once you start talking about a co-op, what you've got to understand is if it's set up as a co-op, you do not have an asset lock. You do have a situation where later on those assets could be owned by a small number of members who turn up at a meeting and vote to sell it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the outcome. And again, I got a boring email alert during the week saying this had happened not that long ago. And with a co-op, you have to control your membership all the time and make sure that everyone's looking the same direction, going the same way. And over a period of years, if you don't look after your membership, the assets are at risk, but they're always at risk anyway. So again, some grant funders know this. I think the last time I talked to Big Lottery, they didn't know it. And they actually said to me, we don't care. As long as the money does what we said, we're not bothered what's the money spent, or worse to that effect. So you need, again, I am a salesman for community benefit societies. If you're considering doing anything, just make sure you ask enough questions that you're convinced that you're doing the right thing. That's what Exmoor should look like. And do you know what? Driving in this morning, I would have seen all the pheasants, whereas this morning they were all over the place. I couldn't see them. Right, issuing shares. So the other thing about setting up a community benefit society, as well as it having the asset lock, it enables you to issue shares, because the original way, or the way of becoming a member, is you buy a share in the organisation. And no one's ever sort of monitored that too closely. So unlike buying and selling shares in a publicly traded company, the regulations around it are, you have exemptions. You have exemptions around the regulations. So you're allowed to offer shares to the public in a way that if you did, if you're a private company, you would get in serious trouble for. You can't just offer shares to the public. You have to get authorisation from the Financial Services Authority, who will get people to come in and check what you're doing. And the quite expensive bit is when you sell shares, you kind of you are entering a contract with the person buying them. So you normally you would create a prospectus, some kind of offer document explaining what they're buying shares in. And that's the bit that the Financial Services Authority would be particularly interested in. And that's the bit that would normally cost out to the court, tens of thousands. So the work Wessex did with industrial and provident societies is because it was seen that this is a cheap way of asking people you've never met before, who might not have an interest, do you want to give us money? And you then invested in this thing which will give you an X return. And that's what you can't do normally. You can with industrial and provident societies, but there are two types. I might come on to that, probably not. But one of them is a co-op. So in this particular case, I'm not sure we need it.
So, previously you mentioned charity trustees,
Yeah.
but they couldn't use the money they got. They couldn't refund it back into other projects. Is that correct?
A charity can use its money how its objects allows, and they must be charitable objects agreed with the Commission. So that's the tricky bit. Once you've agreed that, and the other thing to bear in mind is...
If you give money to charity, they can give the money to another charitable project.
Yes, if that would match their objects.
Well, so logically it would be to raise two charities, self-funded between us.
I think you would have problems. Yes, you would have problems there. Because fiduciary duties, both charities are supposed to be doing the best for their particular charity. I don't know how you would square that. But the thing about charities is they can't raise share capital. They can borrow money, but they can't raise share capital. So you get exemptions from the way you issue shares, which reduces the cost. And the types of shares you then issue are very specific to industrial and provident societies. The shares are withdrawable. They are not transferable. So whereas I could sell my shares in either Tesco or something to anyone else, and I would normally do it through the market, but I could do it through a broker. You couldn't do that with the shares that you would be issuing as an industrial provident society. You could sell shares, and then people have the opportunity to try and get you to buy the shares back again. But there is a risk to the shareholder in that the society doesn't have to always buy the shares back, and doesn't have to buy them back at full price. That would depend on the financial health of the organisation, and that's worth bearing in mind. And that's the big difference between shares and debt. If I lend someone £10, I want £10 back. That's a different thing from investing £10 and my £10 then riding on how well things are going. And that has issues about engagement as well. So if I've invested in Exeter Real Food Store in Exeter, and I kind of did it as a very arm's length way, but I find myself just wanting to know that my investment is still there. Whereas if I donated the money, I'm just think, I see the air ambulance that I give money to, but I don't really care about the air ambulance so much. But the food story I'm more engaged with because I invested in it. So the limitations on withdrawable shares, I said there are some exemptions, but what you have to be careful about is no real-time communications. That's the biggie. And it's very tempting once you've got a scheme going and you want to get money in to run around telling everyone and asking for money. And that's the thing that the Financial Services Authority particularly don't want you doing. It's easy to get around, and I say get around in a kind of proper legal way. It's easy to get around just by making sure you've always got a paper trail of whatever's happened. So if you're emailing people, if later on there's a problem, you have a trail of emails showing what you told them, how you explained it to them, and they then would only have a legitimate complaint if you misled them. And again, this is where you then become personally liable, which is worth bearing in mind. So you need to create your offer document, and you need to be able to sign off on that offer document personally. So if you can imagine the board of Tedesco raising £305,000 between, I think, the 7 of them. They took in all that money and they're now personally liable for how they raised that money. And that's quite a big deal. And I am dealing with another organisation around here where I think a board member has actually stepped down because they weren't quite happy about the financials. They couldn't quite agree on the financials. So rather than stop the project going forward, they just said, this isn't for me. And I think we have to accept that there will be. Wessex Community Assets, having given lots of advice, we're now doing it ourselves because feed-in tariff at the moment is as high as it's ever going to be, and the actual kit is gone down in price so much. We're going to put some on the roof. We're looking at raising about 100, maybe 150,000, and I'm going to have to sign off on that as one of the board. And it makes you quite alert to the situation. And what I have to do is agree with everything that everyone's saying. And that has to be written down and kept forever. So that if there's any complaint, you can say, look, we were true and fair. And that's all you have to be, true and fair. So it's not a big deal, but it's really important that you are. So you mustn't oversell, and you must explain our risk. If the thing blows off the roof, or your turbine gets stolen, what happens? And that is a risk. I know PV in Germany does get stolen, for instance. Right, so this is back to my sales pitch, because I've got 5 minutes. I want to sell you all and get started. The reason I would choose one of these to do something is because it does what it says on the tin. It's the Community Benefit Society. It's for the benefit of the community, not the members. The asset lock means that people joining, they invest their money in, something is put somewhere, as you hope that generates money, and that will give a social return to people because they're seeing that they've achieved something, and a financial return as long as it doesn't blow off the roof. But they've been warned about that in your offer document. And everyone gets one vote, and that's guaranteed, unlike a company limited by guarantee, where you could have a class of members who don't have a vote. That is in law. That is law. That's in the Act. So that can't be changed. There's no way that anyone can find that they put an amount of money in and they no longer have a vote. And the other nice thing about it is that in a community where you want everyone to agree to this huge, great increment at the middle of the square, you will find some people who've got a lot of money want to make it happen. Some people haven't got much money, but still want to make it happen. This one member, one vote means it doesn't matter how much money you put in, you get an equal say. And that's really important. The counter to that is you do need to be careful about people joining just so they can vote no. Just something to bear in mind. But it does mean that it's genuinely owned and run by the community. It doesn't depend on your wealth. It just, it's there. It's got the asset lock. And yes, when you're issuing the shares, you back down to this thing and who are you doing it for? The asset lock. All this stuff, is on the back shelf. I've printed some stuff out. I've just put that again because if you can't quite answer those points, don't go the share route. Think about it. If you can get grants and everything, just go for grant. But if you're issuing shares, you need to be thinking about how you're going to engage people, because although with our research shows that people will invest more than they will donate, because a donation is just like gone. Investment, you do think, yes, this is part of what I want to do with my life. There is this little thing about possibly getting a financial return. Feed-in tariff does make financial return look quite good at the moment. But if you don't want that kind of engagement, shares aren't for you. If you want engagement, shares are a really good way of doing it.
So could you go over the types of societies that can issue shares? Because I think you said
Yes, two. No. There are 2 types of industrial property societies which can offer shares to the public. One is set up as a co-op, one is set up as a community benefit society. Now, you might be quite happy setting up a co-op, But for instance, one of the slides we were looking at early on, where there was a car share scheme. If you have members joining a car share scheme and it's a co-op, there is a chance that members who are paying, I don't know, £100 in, get the opportunity to sell all the assets. So you want some way of protecting those cars from being sold off for the immediate gain of a few members. And that's where a community benefits stuff are useful. You could run it, if you weren't trading, or you were trading in a suitable way, you could run it as a charity to get that asset lock, but then you can't issue shares. So the thing is that if you want shares and an asset lock, then community benefit society is for you. That's why we do this, because Wessex is interested in communities owning and financing assets they own and control, and that's the way to do it. And the problem with co-ops is always the wonkiness around the asset. I think that might be. Done some work with H2OPE, Hydropower Enterprise at North, putting in reverse RPD screws. I just thought, I think they're amazing. I don't think they actually produce much electricity, but they're very nice. Feed-in tariff, EIS tax relief. If you issue shares as a community organisation, you're eligible for EIS tax relief, or your investors may be eligible for EIS tax relief. It depends on personal circumstances, because it's reduced off that year's income tax bill for that investor if various other things present. So you can't guarantee it, but you can make sure your scheme is eligible for it. And we're quite lucky with that, because a privately owned feed-in tariff gaming scheme would not be eligible for EIS. There was a bit of a fuss kicked up when it was dropped, and they said, no, all right, communities can keep that. That just means you can invest a maximum of £20,000 in an industrial property society. So if you've got high net worth individuals who are particularly keen on something happening, then this will be of interest to them, because it's 30%. It's 30% return on the amount they've invested, knocked off the next tax bill. There is a cost issue around. I mentioned company limited by guarantee earlier on, £15. To set up an industrial property society is £500. That's because all the legal work has to be done around them. They're just not routine. And you have to stay registered, and at the moment you register with the Financial Services Authority, and they will send you a bill for £55 every year to stay registered. So it's 15 to stay as a company, 55 for an industrial provident society. So you have to weigh up the running costs. You need to make sure that when you do your business plan at the start of all this, you can see that there's going to be enough surplus produced to offer the return you're hoping to offer to your investors, and also just running costs. I mean, all these things have running costs. You need a registered address for the secretary who's going to be posting stuff out, this kind of thing. Yeah, I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to stop there. I think I've probably covered most of that. And any questions, we'll go doing questions. Okay.
Can I just ask why you haven't mentioned kick limited by shares? Because that has an asset lock.
Yeah, because kick limited by shares, you would still have to go through the FSA to issue them. So it would cost you a huge amount of money. And the other thing about kick limited by shares is the voting would depend on the share holding.
Yeah.
So the people who put the most in have the most say. So from a community standpoint, that's not what Wessex is interested in. But mainly it's the cost.
Could I just do a quickly? You mentioned the business plan
Yes.
that you need starting with this.
Yes.
Does that business plan need to be in the offer document?
No. But
Why not?
Well, what you do is you agree on a business plan, board signs off on it, and then you offer investors whatever you want to offer them. If they then say to you, I don't understand, before I give you money, can you back this up somehow? You give them sight of a business plan. But how much of that is up to you? And if the investor starts walking away, leave them to walk away. Now the reason I say that is because some of this is commercial incompetence. So for instance, the extra shop could not release their business plan to the public because they are up against the high street. So they couldn't have put all the information online. They couldn't have printed it out and just handed it out to people. So what had to happen was the board had to be convinced itself that the business plan was sound. It then sold people the idea that we know the business plan is sound. because otherwise, I mean, one of the other things is I was dealing with an organisation, I was dealing with an organisation about 2 years ago who had spotted a place in the river to put a hydro scheme. Another private company spotted the same place because they were out doing community work building interest. A private company came in and bought the site and installed their own hydro for private profit, and the community lost out on that. So there is a little bit about it. You have to be a little. These feed-in tariff works for everyone. I mean, there are companies out there offering for free PV on roads because it makes money.
I do have some share offer documents here.
You, what are you doing here?
I'm talking next. But share offer documents. So,
Yeah. Would you agree about the commercial competence then?
it's a tricky one, yeah. Certainly in the case of people picking up sites. But you can obviously try and secure the site yourself through options. So before you go out to consultation, you make sure you have rights to that site. So you can be open about it, but when you tie the site down.
It would be very contrary to what goes on in the private sector. Public offerings always disclose all the facts, all the risks, all the business plan, what the success is likely to be. I mean, it's well thought
So you
through
can do
and offered to everybody.
You can do that, but if it comes down to, for instance, what you've agreed with the local land, with the local building owner, what their terms are, that's a different thing. That's between you and them. All you have to show is your figures stack up, and if the figures don't stack up, then people can say your figures didn't stack up, and then you can prove it in court. But you don't have to put it all in the offer document.
It doesn't sound transparent to me.
We just have two separate documents. Okay, so people, bizarrely, we just run a share offer and two people have looked at the business plan. The share offer explains the expected returns, which is what people were actually interested in.
Right.
And then the information's there. You don't have to put it all in one massive fat document that someone's going to
I mean, the other thing is, with this kind of thing, a lot of people won't understand the figures. You do a spreadsheet, feed-in tariff, and it starts looking really complicated, and you just think a lot of this stuff is made up. Because no one knows what feed-in tariff is really going to mean in 22 years' time. Okay.
Can we put our hands together for Sean?